Welcome, people, to a new episode of Lichtblock Professionals. And I have a really exciting guest today. And you hear it already. It's an episode in English again. But of course, many great speakers are English, or you're Australian, actually, right, Cameron?
Yes, Australian, yeah.
And I have Cameron Borg. He's what are you? You're like a nutritionist, a pulmonary scientist. You're a speaker. You have your own podcast. And I think you are like just one of those really kind of there are not many people in this world, who like to dig deep on things we're going to talk about today. And that's the reason why I invited you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I always really enjoy speaking to people like yourself, particularly where I'm not the one asking the questions for once. Yes, on my podcast, I have to do a lot of work. I know how much work it is to prepare, so it's nice to just be in the other seat for once.
I mean, in the end, I didn't really prepare much for this podcast, but I listened a lot to your episodes, so the Ricky Flo Nutrition podcast, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great speakers, like Scott Zimmerman, Glenn Jeffries, like all those guys, who talk about light a lot and water and all these aspects of it. And then I was like, okay, so apparently you get to know all these guys like in depth, and why not invite you into our show to make some concepts a little bit more simple, because it's one of the big problems in our today's world, where we have to somehow make this knowledge more applicable to the rest of the world. And that's my mission as well. And of course, the background is also our company, but in the end, it's also just my own interest, because I'm same, like maybe a little bit like you as well, maybe not that deep into it, but I always try to see from the therapist perspective, like what can we really use, and what is really helpful. And one of the first things I see with you as well, like light is not shining straight into your eyes, but you have a background light. So for all the light freaks out there, that's actually how it has to be if you see it on video, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit for the people. I mean, I already told you, I got to know through the podcast, but what is your background? Like, how did you get deep into the topic of light?
Yeah, so you did a pretty good job introducing me before. I'm a nutritionist, currently in Sweden, doing my master's, and I was working as a pulmonary scientist before at a hospital, which was really quite interesting. I've been running my podcast for maybe 3 years now, a bit over 3 years. And yeah, I really enjoy writing, and I really enjoy speaking with people who are much more intelligent than me, and picking their brains and figuring out essentially how life works. I think there's so many gaps in science, and there's so many great books out there that ask great questions, and typically those are not the questions that are asked in conventional education. And I've just become really interested in these big ideas, even into the philosophy of science, which I find remarkably interesting as well. So, and I really got interested in light because I was unwell and I needed to get better, and doctors didn't seem to have any answers for me. And of course, you're always looking for the thing that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. And light really turned out to be the big player in this game of health that is quite overlooked the vast majority of the time. And the more I thought about it, the more obvious it became that our light environment has changed beyond comprehension in the last century or so. And of course, we should be looking at the things in our environment that have changed the most over the last century to understand what's been going on with all of the changing dynamics of health. And our light environment has changed immeasurably. It's just unfortunate that the way our eyes have developed, we don't even notice that it's really changed that much. But when you look closely at the problem, you realize that the lights that we're exposed to today are absolutely nothing like any of the light we were exposed to since we were first, anatomically modern humans 200 to 300,000 years ago. So that's really where my interest in light came, is trying to find the thing that's got the, really the biggest influence, and the thing that you can use to bring about better health the most. And yeah, light really ticks that box.
Can I ask you, like, what kind of symptoms did you had, like, before you got into that whole topic? Was it like the typical one, or?
Yeah, so I was usually, as a child, I was quite sick all the time. Not a super vital child, and I had all sorts of issues with my gut that had persisted throughout my life, and it eventually hit a point where I had fatigue really, really badly, where it was difficult to go out and do things, and I was unable to go for a run and that kind of thing. So it was really got to the point where I realized something. I was really missing a big piece of the puzzle. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of just probably symptoms most people who are not feeling quite vital are feeling, whether it's just lethargy, gut issues, trouble sleeping. It's a pretty common thing to experience these days, and probably for a very understandable purpose, given all of the things that we're exposed to that are sort of sapping our vitality. So yeah, very, very broad. I probably very common sort of symptoms to get. I think I was quite fortunate to get this when I was younger, because it got me on this path relatively quickly. A lot of people find out about this stuff much later in life.
Yeah.
So in some sense, it's been a real curse and a blessing at the same time.
I mean, it's the same for me. Like, I got really into the whole Jack Cruz story. Maybe you as well. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's maybe one of the starts for many people. Like, I listened to his Vermont talks, and they blew me away. I was like, okay, I have to go deeper into that. And then I got to know many people from his tribe. Kind of, I've been to Mexico, and I've been in the good magnetic field there and all this stuff. Of course, I also realize it's only one part of the puzzle. There are also other things, like having good friends and relationships and personal development and all this stuff. And one of the things on conferences, I always ask, like, okay, so if light comes to your mind, like, what is the first thing people think about when it comes to health? And everyone says like vitamin D, and
Yeah.
so why, like, maybe from your perspective, why it's not just vitamin D, and what are we missing? And we can also go deep into detail if you want to, but yeah.
God, what are we missing? That's a big question. We're missing, I think, essentially everything. So, something I've been working on recently, just thinking just from a philosophical point of view. I wrote an article called "The Brian Johnson Fallacy," and he's a very interesting cat. And I really wanted to write an article about what I think he's got wrong and why his approach is so terrible. And it really came down to this idea that at the end of the day, there are always going to be so many unknowns, unknown unknowns. So these are things that we don't even realize that we don't know. There's always we're going to be swimming in a sea of unknown unknowns. And that's a difficult pill to swallow, because then you think, well, why bother trying to figure anything out if we're always going to be swimming in unknown unknowns? And the only way to move forward in your theory, whilst also acknowledging the unknown unknowns, is to use nature as the starting point, because all of the unknown unknowns are already baked in. You don't even have to think about it. Our ancestors didn't know what vitamin D was. They didn't
No.
need to. And, the whole point is that their starting point and finishing point was all just nature. So they didn't need to know any details. All the unknown unknowns were already taken care of because nature has done that. And something that really bothers me about the way that science operates is that it operates on the basis that there is no, we are separate from nature. And there is no way of compensating for the fact that there are always going to be unknown unknowns. And the only way you can incorporate that into any sort of theory is to look at nature and see how it works first, and try and mimic nature rather than trying to come up with our own way of doing things. Because at the end of the day, the way that we do things is always going to be far less efficient than nature. Nature
Do-
has maximum
yeah.
efficiency.
Do you think one of the big problems is that our modern world thinks nature does mistakes? Would you say that? Because, I mean, when we talk about light as well, I know it's about like, oh yeah, you get cancer and you get all this stuff, but in the end, like, is it really so that nature like builds in these kind of mistakes, or are we missing something bigger there?
Well, it's a great question, and it's the post. I wrote a post called "Building a New Philosophy of Health." It's the first one on my Substack because I think it's the most important thing to consider for anyone who's interested in improving their health. It's you need sort of a groundwork to sort of ground yourself in before you start investigating anything. And I made the case that I ground my pursuits in this area in the idea that nature doesn't make mistakes. I take that as an a priori fact, and that is my starting point to everything. Because
Yeah.
you need something to ground yourself in. You can't just start asking questions. You need a framework within which to operate, and that is the ground zero. That is the starting point of the way that I think about it, is that nature doesn't make mistakes. And I think of any starting place you could come up with, I think that's the most logical thing to use. And then you need to define, first of all, you need to define nature, and you need to define mistake. And in this article, I give my definitions for those two words, and they differ quite remarkably from the Oxford Dictionary definitions. Oxford doesn't consider human or human activities part of nature, so you can see how pernicious the lexicon is that we're using. When we say nature, technically by their definition, we are not part of it. And this anthropocentric idea where we are just sort of our own thing, we've usurped nature. We've become smart enough to essentially beat nature at her own game. That's really what that definition is saying. Implicitly, it's saying that we have the capacity to basically pull back the velvet curtain and see what's behind, and we can beat nature at her own game. And I fundamentally disagree with that, and that's my starting point. So there is a problem with the way that these problems are sort of looked at, but fundamentally, I don't believe nature makes mistakes. And the reason I make that claim, it's kind of a stark claim, because how can you say that nature doesn't make a mistake? And I guess my way of getting around that, so to speak, is by defining a mistake as something that, if you make a mistake, you necessarily have to go back to a previous point to continue on in the right direction. And nature never has to go back. It can find many solutions to the same problem. It doesn't have to go just one way. It can always find different routes to the solution. So it never makes a mistake. It's always just finding different solutions all the time. And I think that's, again, it's an important distinction between the standard definition of mistake and the definition that I had to come up with to
Yeah.
make my assertion make sense.
I mean, it's the big question if also our health status and where we are today as humans, is there a mistake behind it, or is it just how we adapted and how things are right now? Is it just how
Yeah,
is it good or bad? Is it just like, okay, we slowly become more human, where we have less frontal activity, we can make less decisions, we are more, just like, I need this dopamine kick now, and maybe that's the future of humanity, you know
I hope not.
I hope not too, but it's a big question if there's because when I give keynotes and stuff, I always say like, we need to build a bridge between the digital world and nature. But is there such a bridge, or is literally nature so radical that it says like, okay, I give you a slap in the face and there's no bridge in between?
I think there are. I think we can create a bridge. It's just, again, technology needs to start by copying nature.
Yeah.
And at the moment, no technology does that. I've been close with Tristan, who works at the Daylight Computer, and they've made a computer that uses an analog screen, so no light. It's just a reflective surface. And
I
to
saw it on
me,
your Instagram. Yeah.
yeah, to me, it's just such a good step in the right direction. Of course, it's still tech, and it's not the best thing in the world, but it's such a good step in the right direction, trying to mimic nature by using natural light to run the screen. I think it's possible, that we can build a bridge. What that looks like, I have no idea. You'll have to ask someone much more intelligent than me to figure that out.
I mean, I can just tell you a story of our company where the last 1 or 2 years. I've been really into like how can we create a healthy light bulb? That's a big question which everyone has. Like because I'm also good friends with Alexander Wunsch in Germany, the light biologist, and basically we need a light bulb with infrared again, and but then official regulations, energy saving regulations come in, and you're not allowed to produce it as a company, and then a lot of other things come in as well, like when you, for example, have infrared in the light bulb, you need at least like 30 watts 40 watts in the light bulb to reflect that spectrum to have enough light. But then again, all the things where you put you draw the light in, they only go up to 13 watts in our today's world when you buy something at IKEA. So we get really big problems already coming up where we like, okay, we want to try to find solutions, but it's getting so fast into the one direction where we're like, okay, yeah, this is our quest today.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary problem, isn't it? Because it's such a silly predicament we've put ourselves in. We've removed, we've had a light bulb, the Edison bulb, that we've used for such a long time, and then we've gone, you know what? Let's just remove 90% of the spectrum. What could go wrong? You know,
Cool.
and
Yeah,
then we've done
exactly.
that, and it's just been such a disaster. And even more pernicious is no one has connected the dots with the changing, health outcomes that we're seeing. No one's connecting that to, hey, we completely changed the light that we've been exposed to.
Yeah. Even in the last 10 years, and I always say like, okay, like, of course, when we look at light, like as well with the industry stuff and like making like the night into day again, but the last 10 years with our usage of our smartphone and like LED stuff, I think that was one of the craziest changes ever, and I asked myself like, okay, because when I see societies, for example, in China and stuff, and everyone is like, oh, it's amazing what they do and everything is so smart and digital. You create crazy societies, but which maybe rot from the inside, which collapse from the inside. It feels like that is at least also coming up in our society, and that's where you can get really philosophical then.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes me think being in Stockholm and the recent Nobel Prize being given out. I was thinking, I think it was, when was it, in the 30s or something, where the person who got the Nobel Prize was given it because of lobotomies. They'd done thousands of lobotomies, and I look back at 2014, the three guys that got the Nobel for creating the blue LED. And it's an extraordinary achievement that they did, because it took such a long time to create a blue LED. But I think we'll look back on that perhaps in 100 years and look back at it the same way we look back at lobotomies, in that the blue LED has completely changed life. Not only humans, but the fact that it's everywhere now. It's destroying all of the wildlife that's exposed to it at night. Yeah, it's an unfortunate disaster. It seems like a really good idea. Energy efficiency sounds great, but again, when you're not using nature as the guide, you're not even thinking about, well, this looks nothing like what anything in nature looks like. If we had the underpinning philosophy that nature was the guide, the blue LED would have never been made and distributed the way that it has been, because we would have realized instantly there are going to be consequences for generating narrowband light with a peak at somewhere between 420 and 480 nanometers. Nowhere in
Yeah.
nature does that happen, so we should anticipate negative consequences anytime we do something like that. So I think a better philosophical underpinning would really fortify us against really bad ideas like that.
So maybe we can go like maybe a little bit for the people who don't really know that much about light, but maybe just quickly go through with those the different spectrums, like with UV light, visible light, infrared light, and maybe you can sum up a little bit those health benefits, and then see maybe what, from your perspective, like really the big missing part. Like from my perspective, it's the whole infrared story, but maybe you have a different opinion about it. Yeah, let's maybe start with UV light, for example.
Yeah, UV is fascinating, and back before photosynthesis, so over 2 billion years ago, there was no atmosphere that filtered out the UVC, so the really really short wavelength UV light, and that UVC light played an enormous role on the early Earth because it interacted with water, and when UVC light interacts with water, it can generate reactive oxygens, just like it does when you get an X-ray. The reason X-rays are so damaging is because the the wavelengths of the X-rays interact with water in our body and generate hydroxyl radicals, which are extremely damaging to membranes and genetic material and so forth. That's how they can cause mutations. And the same sort of thing was happening with UVC light in the oceans and shallow ponds and so forth in the early Earth. And the reason that's so brilliant is because the single-celled organisms that respired by essentially breathing, sulfur compounds, and they had other metabolisms that ran on other hydrogen sulfide and other things, not oxygen. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere yet, and that UVC light was generating reactive oxygens. So these organisms, even though they didn't have an oxygen metabolism, had to develop antioxidant enzymes even before there was oxygen in the atmosphere. And this was great because when photosynthetic bacteria came along and they started producing oxygen into the atmosphere, the enzymes to deal with that were already there by some stroke of luck, thank God, because otherwise, the vast majority of life on Earth would have been wiped out by this great oxygenation event. But fortunately, because of UVC light, that didn't happen. And then, of course, the more oxygen is made, the more ozone builds up. And then that starts to filter. And that turns out to be really important for allowing terrestrial life because you can't have UVC light coming on. It's such a high energy photon. It really interferes with biology. But UVB, again, very strong, but it's capable of changing chemical bonds and having quite a large effect on chemical structure and physicochemical structure. And there's a great paper by Andrei Shlomensky. I think it's called something like How UV Light Touches the Brain and Why.
Yeah, I read it as well. Yeah.
Brilliant paper, one of my favorites. And they talk about how important UV light was to creating self-organizing structures because of the input energy that UV light has. It's completely indispensable because of the high energy photons that it provides to the body. They're really important for doing lots of very necessary things. And vitamin D is one of the things that's very important to make, because when we came out of the oceans, we needed a way to regulate calcium and phosphorus, because once we come out of the oceans, that level is not constant anymore, and you need a way to regulate. And that's why vitamin D came along. Seems like a really good system to use UVB light to do that, because it's abundant and you can get it on the skin, and then that takes care of that regulation. But it also does, countless other things that we don't understand. And vitamin D is not just one thing. Of course, it can be hydroxylated at many different points, and you get all these different types of hydroxy derivatives that are all similar to vitamin D, but all do slightly different things. So the vitamin D story is a very, very narrow slice. There's so much more going on. There's urocanic acid, which is another vitamin D-like compound in the skin, seems to be important for learning and memory, particularly in youth, and even prenatally very important. And UVA and UVB are both critical for nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide is a very important reactive nitrogen species, and it plays incredibly important roles in signaling and relaxing the blood vessels. It's incredibly important, and that's probably the main reason why sunlight has such an important effect on cardiovascular outcomes, is because it's actually allowing blood to move properly. But of course, in the sun, it's UV light is always coupled with all of the other wavelengths as well. So then you sort of move into the violets and the blues and the greens and the oranges and yellows and reds and so forth. Now, these are the visible wavelengths that we're most familiar with, and when you look at a white LED, it sort of looks like sunlight. You can't really distinguish. They both look like they have a similar spectrum, but that's because the LED has three large peaks in the blue, red, and green to make it look like it's white. It's just an illusion. It's not like the sun at all. It's just unfortunately the way our eyes evolved, because they never had to learn to distinguish between an LED and sunlight. We can't tell. And unfortunately, the blue wavelengths are also very strong. You'll notice that they're right next to UV. Just because they're visible doesn't mean they're not capable of causing damage. They're very high energy photons, blue and violet. And, when we're sitting in an office cubicle with LEDs or fluorescent tubes on our skin all day with no near infrared, it's completely infrared dark in all these offices. You've got a really big problem with high energy photons constantly irradiating your skin. It's very similar to UV. Yes, they're not ionizing, but they're still very high energy, and they need to be dealt with and balanced, which they're not.
Yeah.
And then we move on into the infrared portion, and this is again invisible to us, just like UV is, but infrared can be sort of divided into like two sections: near infrared and then infrared. And near infrared, I mean, it's very difficult in the literature to find good definitions of this. There's no real like near infrared is this wavelength to this wavelength. Infrared is you don't see that sort of nomenclature. It hasn't really built up yet. But the way that I like to think about it is near infrared photons are basically invisible. I think some people can see maybe a tiny bit, but generally these photons are weakly absorbed by water. So they're not very strongly interacting with water, which is mostly what our body is. And they don't really have any pigments that capture them, or they don't have any chromophores. So they're pretty free once they enter the body to bounce around and scatter all the way through, which is why if you read the literature, near infrared photons are said to penetrate about 1 millimeter. But if you shine a near infrared light through your hand, it goes all the way through. It's not going directly through. It's scattering all the way around and staying in the flesh for quite a long time and then popping out somewhere else. It's because there's really nothing in there to capture it except oxygenated blood. Bones are completely transparent to near infrared. And so that's sort of the main characteristic of near infrared. And that's really important because it basically allows near infrared photons to reach target molecules much easier because they're not being absorbed before they get a chance to get there, which I think is why the mitochondria have evolved to basically be the near infrared chromophore in the body. Most people talk about cytochrome C, which strongly absorbs in the near infrared and promotes mitochondrial flux, which is a really good thing. That's why you're seeing these papers by Glenn Jeffrey showing enhanced CO2 production after irradiation with 660 nanometers. It's because the flux through the mitochondria is going much more efficiently, and that's because the mitochondria are the ones that are absorbing these near infrared wavelengths. And then you go into the infrared. Infrared is more strongly absorbed by water, and this I suspect is having quite tangible effects on water's charge separation, fluid dynamics, density of water. I suspect it's really doing a lot to sort of curate the structure of water, so to speak. I know Gerald Pollack talks a lot about the infrared portion of the spectrum being the most important in creating that charge separation event in water. But I'm sure a lot of other things are going on there. So that was a really long answer to a short question, but just a pretty simple sort of look through about what all of these different portions of light are roughly contributing.
Yeah. I mean, I always have this picture in my head when Scott Zimmerman says it's like a snowball and you shine red light into it and everything is just red, and it's like, this is how our body is actually behaving. And I found it really interesting because we also have this spectrometer and you can literally measure infrared through it, and it's what you said already. The whole literature is just like, just 4 millimeters. It goes in. It's like, is it really like that?
Yeah, well, every 5-year-old with a torch knows that if they put it up against their cheek, the red light comes through.
Yeah, but okay, where do we start with that topic? It's Because one of the key theories in the past with infrared has always been like, oh yeah, there's more ATP in the end, when you shine light on the mitochondria. Would you still think this is the main theory, or are there other things coming up, like maybe what you already said with the charge, the fourth phase of water, that maybe energy is made more efficient because water has different characteristics, and that's the main thing which actually happens. Do you have an answer for yourself?
I like to think of it in terms of the fact that essentially when we're irradiating subjects with long wavelength light, we see generally we're seeing a benefit in mitochondrial dynamics, energetics. Okay. I think the main reason we see that is because we're so infrared starved in the first place. Yeah. It's like giving a supplement to someone who's dying of malnutrition. Of course, they're going to see a benefit straight away. But I think to make the claim that it's more efficient, I think is technically incorrect. I think what that's doing is actually just bringing us back to the level that we should always be at, because when we're living outside, we're constantly exposed to long wavelength light. Even at night, the majority of moonlight, for example, is invisible long wavelength in the infrared. So
interesting.
Most of the light that we get at night, I mean, think about standing around a campfire. Most of the light coming off the campfire is invisible to us, and it's in the infrared range. And because infrared interacts with water, that's where you get the heating effect, which is great. But again, anything above minus 273 degrees Celsius, 0 Kelvin, is emitting infrared light. So it's everywhere, and you can't escape it. And the reality is, when you go inside into your home, you basically eliminate essentially 100% of it. And I think this is basically setting up a situation where we have the wrong baseline for what ATP and mitochondrial dynamics should be. We have an idea in our head of, in literature of what normal mitochondrial energetics are. I think they're wrong. I think in order to measure that, you need to measure people who are living like a normal human should, which is outside, with no artificial light and completely in sync with the rising and the setting of the sun, and in a place where their skin type suits the environment. Does the irradiation make it better? Does it make more ATP? Yes, it generally will result in the creation of more ATP, but I don't think that's, taking it above baseline. I think that's just bringing it back up to normal when you get that burst of long wavelength light, like Glenn Jeffrey has shown at the start of this year. What we're seeing there is not, oh wow, look, we're making people's mitochondria better. All we're seeing is we're making people's mitochondria look like a normal mitochondria for the first time in, God knows, probably since the last time they went to the beach and spent the whole day at the beach. So I think it's not a matter of making it better. It's just trying to get us back to a baseline level that makes it look to the average research scientist like it's improving mitochondrial energetics, which it is, but improving it from a very, very below baseline level.
I mean, that's my question to you. Is there maybe let's not say improving that you can make it really better, but is there a way to make the indoor lifestyle neutral? You know what I mean?
Well, that would be the goal, wouldn't it? Neutral. We're never going to replicate the sun, but I think indoor lighting, we should be striving for something that's not harmful. It doesn't have to be beneficial. We just something that's not harmful, and that's tough because you really need broadband, long wavelength light, and currently, essentially all modern countries have banned incandescent light bulbs. And I know you've spoken to Scott. I mean, you must have an understanding of how difficult it is to make a light bulb that's capable of emitting broadband near infrared light. It's so hard because you need to meet the quotas set out by the DOE, and that's just nearly impossible. And really, the only way you can put enough near infrared in is by gradually waiting for the LED technology to get more and more efficient, because then you can use less energy from the LED portion and more from the filament portion. But I really don't know how we're going to get around this, because candles aren't really ideal either, because then
No.
you're burning, you're oxidizing things and then you're breathing that in. It's not really an ideal situation, unless you're able to keep a very well ventilated home, which isn't all that, isn't easy all the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, we do need safe options. What those are, people ask me all the time. I don't have any good answers for them, unfortunately, because even this light that I'm using behind me, there's no near infrared in it. It's a
No.
completely alien light. Yes, it looks like it's got less blue, but who cares? It's got no near infrared, so it's not doing anything for me.
And we have the light as well in the background. It's our, like, we call it candlelight spectrum. So there's no blue in it, and no flicker. And yeah, we're quite happy with that, especially for the evening, because you can also dim it down to 2%. So it can be really low, especially when your eyes get used to the dark, or how it actually should be. And what I wanted to say, I've been on the German lighting convention. It's called, what's it called again? It was in Frankfurt this year. And it was really interesting, because a lot of the big companies, they also got into the whole circadian lightning stuff, making it smart, and how maybe on the ceiling you can see the clouds and all this stuff. But again, like, no one had the whole infrared. There was a funny thing that I talked to people like who had masters in lightning design and stuff, but this whole topic was not on their minds at all. Nothing. It was just about like how people feel, what's good for the design, and how, the lumen and everything. And it's really crazy. It's really crazy. And then we found this really small stand. It's like this Chinese company cooperating with a German company. And there were some Chinese guys, and they're called the alchemists of LEDs, and which was crazy, because they created this LED which goes up to 1,000 nanometers. So you have this whole spectrum, even going like in the infrared spectrum. But again, then you have the whole story that it takes a lot of energy, of course, and you're not really able to sell it in Germany. And it's just this really, like, this whole fair, thousands of people there, it's just this tiny stand, like, with people being interested in it. And this made me really wonder, is like, where do we really go right now, like, as humans? And yeah, it was a crazy experience. And everywhere I go, like, I speak to big companies, like we've been to Volkswagen and stuff. No one has this in their head, and no one talks about it.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And, I
Yeah,
wrote an article specifically about this, called "The Problem with Circadian Lighting." And I based a lot of my writing about the work that was done by NASA on their circadian lighting. Millions of dollars went into this. They wanted to make lights for submarines and the ISS. Zero near infrared. Just cut it. It was all visible light only, and they spent
yeah,
millions of dollars on this. And I find it funny, because you can get one of Scott's lights for like $20 in America, and it's going to be, even though it's not something that goes through the cycle of color temperatures like the daylight would. At least it's got broadband near infrared in it, and he's hand soldering them at his house. So I
I
just find
know.
that quite funny that the circadian people aren't talking to the photobiomodulation, or the light and life interactions people, going, it's not just about, we can't just have melanopsin tunnel vision, and anything with no blue light in it is good. That's not the point. This light behind me has no blue light in it, but it's got no near infrared. So is it really, it's still an alien light. It's not what our biology is meant to be dealing with at all. So I'd much rather have Scott's light that has a little bit of blue and green in it, or a candle for that matter, that's still got a little bit of blue and green in it. But because
Yeah,
the proportionality of it is so low, because most of the light that's coming off them is long wavelength. So I just think these people need to come together, and yeah, you need to sort out the issue with car lights, because they're really damaging when you're
yeah.
driving around at night.
I heard about. Yeah, I mean, we let's say like half a year ago, we brought out our like day lenses. We called it work and play. And beforehand, I was really against like blue blockers for the day, because I always said like we need enough light, especially during the day, because I think when we are not outside, like we literally are also light deficient from the intensity and stuff,
Yep.
and then you're constantly under blue light, and it creates this weird thing. And right now we actually say like, okay, if you're in a really intense LED environment, I'm going to tell you like maybe for 1 hour or so, like wear those glasses to relax your eyes a little bit, and then you can continue, but not, of course, wear it the whole time, but even there, like the whole blue blocking glasses market is a really weird thing, because it takes a lot of explanation, and there's a lot of different opinions out there about things, especially the transparent glasses.
Yeah.
Um, so people have, yeah, like you would think it's easier to make people aware of it and to sell it as in Germany, but still up till now, we're like 4 years old. We're only in the biohacking bubble, the small health bubble. We work a lot of coaches and doctors and stuff, but yeah, maybe it's gonna be more in the future. I don't know, but it's a tough thing when people ask you for specific advice, and like, okay, I cannot really give you the 100% answer. This is healthy and this is bad. It always depends, and what is your individual environment and what's going on. Same with red light therapy. I mean, it's one question I would ask you. I listened in the last episode. I mean, those guys, they always say like, oh, red light therapy, it's maybe this really tiny part and you cannot really use it, but we have so many customer feedbacks just using a small panel. Like for some people, their sleep gets a lot better. It's at least something. Where I'm saying like, okay, maybe we just use those things, and it maybe can equalize some of the stuff, not everything. Um, do you use red light therapy for yourself as well?
Yeah, I do. I must admit, I don't use it that regularly.
Yeah,
But having said that, it's the days are getting very short here,
yeah,
and I do flick. I've got a small panel. I think the small ones are really good. I think they're very underrated.
yeah,
And yeah, I just use them in the morning. Because we're waking up now and the sun's not even up. So, and I like to just shine it at the wall. I don't really use it directly on my body, but just to get a little bit of long wavelength light in. But I think red light therapy is extraordinarily useful, and I think any practitioner worth their salt will consider putting it in their toolkit, because principally because where most people in the world are just desperate for long wavelength light. Our
yeah,
bodies don't work without it. It's been such a given since we started to evolve. It's been around all the time. So of course our body just assumes that it's going to be there. And without it, we're constantly running at a deficit. So getting a pulse, even if it's a short amount of time, is really going to have lasting effects. And yeah, for instance, I used it this morning actually, for the first time in a while, because I just had a bit of a sore shoulder because I was, carrying a bag and, traveling. I just got back from the water conference in Portugal, and yet my back was a little bit sore. It works remarkably well for stubborn injuries like that. Wound healing. I've got a little
yeah,
tend light as well, just a little pen light with 3 LEDs in it. They're not things I use every day, but I think they're just really, really important to have in the toolkit. But again, these are very, very powerful tools. They're very, very high intensity relative to what you would be getting in sunlight. And you have to realize that you're using light as a drug, and you
yeah,
have to be careful because when you're shining it on cells and they're increasing their flux, they're also increasing reactive oxygens quite a lot. So they're modulating your redox system quite profoundly. And I suspect most of the time people are using red light panels, it's modulating it in the right direction in a net positive way. But I'm sure there are circumstances when people are using them where perhaps the net outcome of the redox modulation might be negative. And how to distinguish between that, I think again the only way to sort of have an idea of which direction you're moving the needle is to try and mimic nature as close as possible. So it's red light therapy is not something I use every day, but it's definitely part of the toolkit. And I'm lucky I have one of Scott's bulbs, so it's always on, even if I don't need the light. I want the near infrared in the room. So and I spend as much time outdoors as I possibly can. So it's probably going to have a little bit less of an effect on me than it might on someone who's working in an office all day, for instance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suspect I'll be using it a lot more during winter, just because it's much more difficult to access long wavelength light when it's freezing outside, and you've got stuff to do indoors that you can't do in the snow and so forth. So yeah, I think it's extremely beneficial, and I think it should be implemented in all hospitals. To be honest, I mean that's really the place that this is going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah.
But yeah, red light therapy is it's not a perfect therapy. It's using light as a drug, but my goodness, a lot of people need that drug right now.
I mean, I saw like it's what I do right now as well at Alexander Wunsch. I saw like he uses those I say for night vision cameras, like the 850 nanometers. You can buy it on Amazon just for $40 or something.
Yeah.
And then you direct it against the wall, and you can still see that you can still measure it everywhere in the room, the 850 nanometers. And I think even if it's just a little bit of it, I think it can still make a difference, and it's, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is how I think right now about it. Or sometimes as well with our panel, like most of people use it in the evening as passive light, like straight against the wall. I mean, of course, too high intensity of red light also has a bad effect on your sleep. But I mean, somehow we still need to do things in the evening. We cannot just go to bed at like 8 right now. And I know some people do it, and I would say like if you have like a proper like issue with your health right now, like you should maybe consider going to bed more early, right? I would say as well, right?
Yeah.
And like can you, like the whole water conference, like maybe in 2 sentences or stuff, can you summarize like what did you learn there? Was there something really which blowed your mind away, or was it all
Oh man, I'm still trying to piece together what happened, because it was 33 speakers,
crazy?
all just brilliant. So everything from cymatics, imprinting, so using frequencies to influence water, measuring the structure, which seems to be quite difficult to do, actually understanding what structure of water is. Generally in the conference, people use the term structured water, but there was a very clear and mutual understanding between everyone that these specific structures, I'm sure it's not just one. There's water can do all sorts of different things, but there's all different types of structures depending on the way that it's influenced. Just so much incredible information. Even speakers on the work of Peter Garyaev, who was a Russian geneticist, I think, looking at the wave genome effect, which is very interesting as well. Not so much to do with water, but I mean, all DNA is hydrated, so water plays quite an important role in that system, I think. And lots of talk about the science of homeopathy. So I've seen some brilliant explanations as to how homeopathy can actually work, and why high dilutions are actually really the most beneficial, which is quite counterintuitive. But there were so many. I hope they put the talks on YouTube in a few months' time. They really should, because it's very powerful work. But there's just so much work that's being done in the area of water, and I really think life is the intersection between light and water, or water and just electromagnetic phenomena in general. But
Yeah.
I think the water story is intimately tied with the light story. You can't really separate them. They're both the same thing, because I think a lot of the effects that we're seeing, the positive effects, are being mediated by changes in water when we're in natural light environments. So yeah,
I mean,
not
one
quite
thing
two
which now,
sentences, but
yeah, now one thing which comes to mind, just I mean, for example, a lot of people do experiment with those frequency pads, where you can program things into your water. Like this one would be one question, and another one is like, at least in Germany, it get really big right now. The whole quantum stuff, like you buy a cube, and then apparently it charges you Like, did they talk about these things as well, or not really?
They did, and prior to going to the conference, I must admit I thought it was all quackery, but
I still think
but uh, but there was some very interesting presentations that looked into imprinting and using those types of devices where you'd put the water on a particular um, you know uh, biogeometry device or frequency device, and it does seem to have tangible changes to some of the qualities of that water, long term changes as well, which I can't explain. And to be fair, the people presenting did sell products, so take this with a grain of salt. But I must admit the evidence that they presented was enough to at least get me to stop calling it quackery. There's stuff going on. I don't know if we understand what it is, but there are things going on. And as far as the quantum cubes and the stickers that you put on the back of your phone, the harmonizers, I'm still not convinced about those. But again, there was, I think, Beverly Rubik spoke a little bit about that stuff. I'm hoping to speak to her because I'd like to know myself. It seems totally bogus to me. I can't imagine that would do anything, but apparently it does. And she's got one of those pendants, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. It seems a bit like I'm very open minded, and that seems a bit woo woo to me.
I mean, I'm also really open-minded. It's just a problem when there are like 20 different companies and they all have different mechanisms. What they
Yeah,
say, one is
yeah,
like scalar, and the other one is this and this, and then I'm always like, okay, because in the end, it's also our mind, like our thoughts and stuff, and how we think about ourselves, and this also, of course, can create different things in our body, and I like at least the last 2 years. I mean, I moved a little bit. I've been first in the whole functional medicine thing, then I went into the whole light thing. And the last 1 or 2 years was more personal development, where I was really looking into my whole identity. But I think I couldn't have done that without the basis, of like, maybe having a foundation, and I think, yeah, with light having a foundation, like my thoughts are more clear and I can think different about myself more, and I now the time, for example, before the whole light story, I've been really into the whole spiritual game of like, living in now and Eckhart Tolle and stuff. And I've been into an ashram in Portugal and stuff. And I had this, it didn't feel right. It felt like I was, I say, a little bit above the ground. I was like, and not grounded at all. And I think the whole light thing and getting more into nature and then looking into these kind of things, they ground me even more, and then I can ask again different questions in the whole spiritual realm, and you're not drifting away so much. But again, that's just my story a little bit about this stuff. What I wanted to ask you, because you wrote a lot on your website as well about hydration and nutrition, and I mean, by getting into this whole work, like, I guess you see these kind of topics also a lot different, because right now everyone, when we talk about hydration, is like, yeah, did you get your electrolytes, your potassium, your sodium, and your magnesium? Like, what is hydration for you, and how can we improve our hydration?
it's a really good question. I wish I had a really good answer for you. I think hydration is something that's largely I guess half understood. It's kind of something. Yes, drinking water seems to be the one route to hydration because it's logical. You drink water and what you don't need, gets the blood gets filtered and you excrete it.
Yeah,
But at the same time, there's a whole lot of other things going on to determine, how much water you're holding and how much you're letting go, and a lot of that is dependent, like you said, on mineral concentrations. And I think the reason that is because they're charge carriers. All of potassium, sodium, magnesium. These are charge carriers, and water interacts with them in very particular ways, and their balance needs to be important. Not even just the amount of them that you're having, the relative abundance of each of them and how they play together. Because no nutrient plays alone. They're in a tensegrity system, and when if you take a magnesium pill, the whole system has to adjust to compensate for, perhaps the super physiological dose of magnesium that you took, an hour before you went to bed. And again, it's the same thing. Sometimes that does move the needle in a net positive direction, but how do you know if it's moving in a net detrimental effect? And I think this is something that's quite a big problem with functional medicine, is that you just take things and you use things without thinking about, well, anything that can be a medicine can be a poison. How am I sure I'm tilting the bioenergetics in the right direction? Because no one responds in the same way.
True.
So yeah, it's a bit tricky with regard to how nutrition impacts hydration. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing with hydration is the fact that we make our own water in our mitochondria, and when you perturb or damage the mitochondrial flux, you are making yourself dehydrated, because that generation of water at cytochrome C oxidase complex 4, is lower when flux is not functioning well. And this comes back to what I said before: the long wavelength light that improves mitochondrial dynamics back to the baseline level is a given for our biology. Our body assumes it's there all the time, and we don't have it. So when we don't have it, our water generation goes down in the mitochondria because the flux is lowered. And I think this is really what's key to hydration. And I recently wrote an article called "How Sunlight Hydrates," and I make the case that really the best way to be hydrated is to have your mitochondria functioning in a way that they would like to be functioning, i.e., they have all the signals that they need to know what's going on and what to do, and they have all the tools, i.e., the right nutrients in order to do what they want to do. And when that's happening, you're generating enough water to sustain your metabolic activity. And I'm not sure if I wrote this in the article, maybe I did, but just the thought of mine was, I think generally mitochondrial water production is the water that's hydrating, and the water that you drink is more of a, I hate this word, but I will say detoxification mechanism, where you're using it as a way to excrete things, and basically what you're doing is you're losing excess protons, you're losing excess positive charge, and you're helping balance the system. I'm not sure if I completely agree with that thought that I had, where mitochondrial water is the real hydration, the water that you drink is more for detoxification and balancing. But I think it might be a useful way to think about it, because right now you could say, I'm sitting in front of a computer inside with, I don't have any near infrared in here. You could say that my cells are dehydrating as I'm sitting here. And I think this is why guys like Jack Kruse always say technology dehydrates you, necessarily, because what it's doing is it's interfering with mitochondrial bioenergetics. So anytime you do that, you're necessarily becoming more dehydrated.
So when you work with clients, like what kind of tips can you give them to improve mitochondrial flux? I mean, we talked about light right now. Like, what else do you do with them, which is easy to implement?
Yeah, I mean, it's beyond that. I mean, really just getting outside, generally you're going to lower your exposure to any sort of man-made electromagnetic fields that might be perturbing your mitochondrial dynamics. So, really it's about, unplugging as much as you possibly can, living like an Amish person to the as best as you can. I think also just eating a diet that's as local as possible. I think this is really underappreciated, how important it is to eat food that grows in your region, and not eating foods that are imported from all over the world. I really, really think that food is one of the signals, just like light, just like the magnetic field where you live, just like all of these different things. Food is a signal from the environment telling it important information about what's going on. Right now, where I am, you can't get, grapes, for instance. You can't get a banana here. So I think it would be much more beneficial to not focus on what foods, but just to tell the person, because I've been working with people from who are in Mexico, people in Switzerland, people back in Australia, and all of the answers are different because they have different availability. They have different environmental exposures to deal with. And as we're coming into winter and there's hardly any vegetables and fruits available where I am, it's really becoming more reliant on animal based foods, and just trying to mimic what the natives would have done here. And again, there are always so many unknowns with regard to hydration. The best thing we can do is to try and live as closely as we can to the native people that live wherever we live. And it's going to be slightly different for you than it is for me. The light cycles are slightly different where you are versus where I am. I'm
Yeah.
going to need a different amount of sleep. I'm going to need to put my blue blockers on, probably before you. I'm going to probably need to eat more fat and protein over winter than you might be able to get away with. So, really it comes back to trying to mimic what would happen in nature. Because I don't have all the answers, but I do know nature does. So the closer you get to nature, the more answers you're going to fill in by default. So it's not really a good answer. I mean, obviously, the more time you spend outside, the better. Eat as local as you possibly can, organic preferably, and make sure you're basically trying to rise and fall with the sun. These things take care of so much, and beyond that, there is a place for things like supplements, but generally I don't feel all that comfortable using them because again, I don't know what the second, third, fourth order effects might be, and unless I have a very good reason to use them, which sometimes you do. Generally, it's getting people back in touch with nature, getting them to unplug as much as possible. Get the Wi-Fi on a timer at least, and you know, generally that's going to result in pretty good outcomes.
From your opinion, can you be vegan and healthy in our today's world?
Short answer, no.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I just don't see it as a possibility. I think you can get by, but you certainly won't be thriving. Um,
Yeah.
some people seem to do it really well. I must admit. I'm sure there are vegans out there who are healthy than me, but it's not something I would ever feel comfortable recommending at
Yeah.
all. Even therapeutically, like as a short term thing, I can't see any benefit in it.
Because I found that, I mean, what we talked about in the beginning already, like how our world is changing, our brain as well a little bit, and um, if we're constantly in this short circuit thinking, and also really emotional and just being trapped by that, um, I see it in my environment that, like, for example, a lot of women, they make those really short emotional decisions, or like, oh, this animal, I'm so sorry for it, that's the reason why I don't do it. And then they program the whole body, that it's really disgusting to have any protein and stuff. So you get into this whole, I don't know, it feels really an artificially made scare, like, yeah. I don't know how I could frame it, but maybe you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. What
Yeah.
what what is what is being done is you're creating an artificial stress where there need not be stress, and you're associating it with something that I think is generally going to be net beneficial to you.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I've seen it in my practice. When some long-term vegetarians and vegans there was really bad health problems, and they just start eating a little bit more protein, and the whole thinking was coming back. They could make better decisions. The sleep was better, and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, I think some people, they literally think they are that. They think, like, if they have anxiety and stuff, they've been in for their whole life, and they think that's their personality. But maybe there's something even more calm behind that. Um, can also be, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's very underappreciated how much the mind impacts our state of well-being, and that's something that really came through at this water conference, is how much conscious intentions impact water, for instance. And you think, well, I'm mostly water, so what happens when I have negative self-talk what happens to the chemical composition of the water in my body, and how is that,
True.
everyone knows, if they have a loved one tell them, that they love them, you can feel in your body chemistry changing. It's no surprise that things like that have profound effects. And just as you were alluding to before, if you create this feedback loop where every time you see a piece of meat you feel disgusted and ashamed and stressed, yeah, perhaps if you eat it you're probably not going to have a good time. And it may not be in that moment that it would be good for you, like it would be for someone who, knows their farmer and knows the animals were treated well, and they're very grateful for the food that they have. It's a totally different experience,
Yeah.
and that's just all perception. So it's
Yeah.
very underappreciated how much that impacts. And I think, just coming back to those, sort of biogeometry devices and the harmonizers and so forth, I think it's possible that a lot of the effects coming out of that are people just feel safer when they're using them.
Yeah.
And I really hope they're genuine, because if they are, then I'll use them. But I just don't think that they are.
So from all those people you interviewed in your own podcast right now, is there something which, I'm doing the same. Like I interview people, I learn from myself as well a lot, and I love it, And is there something which like kind of sticked out a lot, which maybe changed a lot of your thinking as well, or has it always been one line of thinking, and that we already said already with, okay, nature is the gold standard. I mean, all the things you just talked about, like we need to look into the environment, eat local, be outside. Were there some other things which were new for you, or like which you changed for your own life, which was maybe a game changer? Like,
I can't think of anything in particular where I was, because usually when I'm speaking to someone, I've done my dues. I've done quite a bit of research. I have a pretty good understanding as to what their views are. So I'm rarely sort of blown away by something, a guest would say, although it does happen. But I remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, I spoke to Veda Austin. I don't know if you know her work. She's a crystallographer from New Zealand, and she does these amazing things with, she'll just put a little bit of water in a petri dish, and she'll project an intention onto it, or she'll put a photo underneath it, and then the water crystallizes, showing an image of what was, sort of imprinted on the water, so to speak. And
crazy.
I was fascinated by her work because it seems quite repeatable. She's got people all over the world doing this, and yeah, it's really remarkable. And of course, my mindset was always, what does Veda think the best water to drink is? That always comes down to that when you're talking about water. What's the best water to drink? What's going to make me the healthiest? And I asked her, sort of in a childlike manner, what water should we be drinking? And she said, first of all, we have to stop and think about how lucky we are to even be asking that question. And that really sticks in my mind as such a poignant moment in all of the episodes that I've done, because I was just coming into this, with a real sense of privilege, I suppose. And she brought me right back down to earth with such a simple, you know, think about how lucky we are to even be asking, what water should I be drinking? It was very, very profound, and it sticks with me to this day, even though that was a few years ago. But
Do you still
extremely
have an answer
profound.
to that, like with like low deuterium, like osmosis water, or what is your?
I think she spoke about her particular experience with this one spring water in New Zealand that has unbelievable properties. I think out of the ground, out of the spring, it's like pH 11, which is remarkable. And she attributes the drinking that water to healing. She had a quite a nasty car accident, and there were all these empty beer bottles in the back of the car, and all the glass went into her body. And after she started drinking this water, the glass started coming out, quite rapidly. So she attributes a lot of
Crazy.
her healing to that water. But yeah, I mean, again, spring water is magic. We don't understand it at all. There are things going on when it's being filtered by the rocks, and it's going through the process of becoming, what Victor Schauberger called, like young rain, and when it comes out of the spring, it's mature water. And we don't know what's happening, but spring water, if you find a good spring and you drink from it, makes you feel like Superman, and you can't really explain why.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe let's leave the episode for now. And like, what do you want to achieve in the future? What is your mission? Like, is a message you want to give to our customers or our people, our listeners? Yeah.
I think it's really simple. It's just try getting back into nature as much as possible. I mentioned before in one of my articles that I had to redefine nature, and my definition is the space, matter, and creative presence that promotes life's thriving, and that also happens to be my definition for God, if I had to give one. And I really think that there is so much to be learnt just by being quiet and watching and listening to nature, and how it works, because it's really remarkable when you just stop and try and soak it in. And I really think that's the best thing I could advise people to do. However that looks, it's going to be very different for people all over the world. But yeah, just getting outside as much as possible. Even if you're in the city, there's still light out there. There's still green spaces, and I think the main thing I want to do now is put forward my ideas in the form of long articles, because I think the amount of conversations I've had, and the amount I've thought about this, I have so many ideas that I feel explain a lot of the things that we're seeing in health and disease today. So I'd like to just keep writing, because I think writing can be quite powerful, and hopefully I can get to a point where I can write and make everything available for free, because I'd like people to read it, basically. But I want to keep podcasting. I want to just keep sharing information, and giving people the opportunity to learn about this stuff if they'd like to. Obviously, it's still quite niche, and not everyone's going to want to listen to a 2-hour podcast about light. But there will be people out there who start to realize that the lights that they use impact their health, and we don't know what the butterfly effect of that could be. Maybe they have 3 kids, and all those 3 kids grow up knowing that light is really important, and then they all go off and have their kids, and that idea about light being really important gets passed down. So even if one person listens to this podcast and realizes how important light and all these things we've been talking about, how important they are, the butterfly effect could be huge. So that's really the goal from my point of view.
Awesome. So maybe you can send me all the links, and people see your Substack and your website and all the stuff, and also your podcast, and they can go in depth into these episodes. Just one thought right now came to my head, in my mind. Maybe I just share it. So basically, if we on Instagram we watch all those reels and TikTok stuff, and there's constantly negative or whatever happens there, also has an effect on our whole hydration, right? And body chemistry. Would you say that? Yeah, right. Yeah,
it would be hard to think that it wouldn't be having effects on all body chemistry, because
it's crazy, actually.
Everyone knows when you get into a what do they call it, doom scrolling, where you just you become a zombie. Your brain actually really turns off. You're not really there. So that's very abnormal, a very abnormal behavior, a very unusual thing for the brain to have to be dealing with. So I recommend people not do that.
Okay, great. So thank you for coming into the show, and I was really happy to get you on the show, and have a good time in Sweden, and good luck with your thesis and everything. And
thank you for inviting me on. It was a real pleasure.
Awesome. Bye.